Hey Whitney, how are
I'm
you?
doing good. I'm in my recovery week after my marathon. So you're saying you had to work out this morning. I am doing absolutely nothing except for eating.
Well, that's great. There's definitely a time and a place for that. I'm like on the upswing, so I'm on the opposite side, like trying to build. So
You're doing
good.
Boston?
Yeah, I'm doing Boston. I'm going to do the
That's
Houston
right.
half
You're doing
in January.
Houston, which,
So got to keep it together, stay in one piece, and show up to the start line. And I'm really excited.
oh, I've only heard great things about that race.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Flat and fast. So
Yes.
hopefully I can perform.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. It's well, that could be a whole nother topic for another day. Like everything is
Yeah.
aligned, great courses, great weather, and then still things don't always go your way, but they can and they will for you. So
Yeah, I'm really excited. Yeah, just positive vibes. Yeah, I
positive
think I'm all
vibes.
good.
Yes, yes. And it's always still, I will say, and then we'll get to the topic at hand. I do regret that, like, so I ran CIM. I mean, all in all, it was like a fantastic experience. I just didn't perform the way that I wanted to. And when I crossed the finish line, I really wish I would have stayed and cheered on the other runners that were crossing the finish line. Instead, I was like, let's just take the picture and go back to the hotel and I'm going to like lick my wounds. And I really regret doing that. So, next race I do in the spring, next big race, like I'm going to, no matter the outcome, like I'm going to stay there and like soak in all the finish line vibes.
Great. I think that's really great. I think there's definitely a lot of, you can definitely get a lot of fun and feel really good when you see other people thriving. It's so much fun. I was watching you run and still it was great to see that and like tracking people. Like it is so much
It
fun
is
for
so
me.
much
Even though
fun.
I'm like
I get like,
10,000 miles away, I was so pumped for everyone. It
I,
was really awesome.
it's so funny. It's like I watch these people that I don't even, I have no idea what their story is. And like, I cry. I get so, and my kids get so annoyed. They're like, wait, mom, what are you doing? But yeah, like that one video, and then we'll move on, of the Caroline Willie, I think was her name. Jake, my husband, was there and saw it. Like she was hobbling to the finish and she was just seconds away from qualifying for the Olympic trials. And she like dove over the finish line and they weren't quite sure if she made it. But I loved like the women that had just crossed, they ran back and they helped her back. I
Carried
know
her.
it's amazing. I mean, like all the
It's so
wonderful
awesome.
like aspects of humanity, I feel like, are illuminated at a race.
Like you said, it reminds you why you run.
Yes.
So I think that's really great. Great like takeaway that you have. And I think I'm going to hold on to that too for my other races. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing
Oh,
that.
good. Well, yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I like, you learn a lot on race day, but we are here to talk about another big topic, hormones and running. It's something that I think a lot of people don't realize that running can have such an impact on your hormones and hormones can have such an impact on your running. So I think I'd like to start a conversation with just kind of talking about the relationship between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I've been getting a lot more questions about this. Like, a lot more clients are seeking me out specifically to help them balance their hormones. And, I usually start those types of sessions with, what are our hormones supposed to do? Many of them are female, but there are males too. So I think the emphasis of this talk, because it's for the Mother Runners podcast, it's going to be mostly on female. I'll maybe mention what happens to men as well.
We do have male listeners actually. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'll make sure to mention that too, because it does play a part for them. So, what does it mean to balance hormones? Like, what does this all mean? So, why is this important? Like you mentioned, hormones kind of control everything in our bodies. They regulate all of our functions, such as the menstrual cycle, bone growth, heart rate, muscle growth and repair, digestion, temperature, blood sugar, mood. They control everything. And they're really just these chemicals in our body that are made by glands, and they send signals to all different parts of the body to dictate what to do. So if and the way they work is there's like when one hormone is elevated, it suppresses another
Mm-hmm.
one. So the way it's affecting runners in particular is when you run, you're creating stress and you're releasing those stress hormones, which are things like adrenaline or cortisol, and which are great because they help us to run and perform better. But at the same time, I call it like a teeter-totter effect. It's suppressing other hormones, which are also important, like our appetite, our bone development and growth and repair, and a whole host of other things, including the menstrual cycle. So when those stress hormones are elevated, the others are suppressed. And that's how it works. And then after the workout, when you recover and hopefully recover properly with food and with rest, those cortisol and those stress hormones start to go back down, and then the other ones start to and help with recovering and feeling good and getting ready for the next workout.
So, some people listening to this are probably wondering, okay, so how do I make sure I am balanced? So, you mentioned recovery. So, I would think like step one is making sure you're not doing like back to back workouts, that you're not having 2 hard days in a row. You're allowing yourself like an easy day or a recovery day in between harder sessions.
Absolutely. So, there's a lot of ways to make sure, and I can go through, some tips on how to make sure that you're recovering properly. You know, Exercise, is a stress, right? Which is actually a good thing for our bodies, and it raises our stress hormones. But, the other component I just wanted to mention is mental stress. So our stress from exercise increases those hormones, but also mental stress. So it's not just about physically recovering, and we'll go through some ways on how to make sure that your body's recovering, but it's also the mental stress. If you are feeling stressed all the time, whether it's work stress or relationship stress or anything else going on in your life, during the holidays it could be stressful, that is almost equivalent to like a workout.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're always feeling mental stress, it's kind of like your body's always in workout mode. So there's really, and like we said, there's that teeter-totter effect. If those stress hormones are elevated, then you're suppressing everything else.
Yeah, I
So
think that is such an important point. I think people are becoming more aware of that stress is stress. Your body doesn't know the difference. And so, like, especially for mother runners in particular who have so much that they're balancing, like, recognizing that if there's something going on with your kid, or you have work stress, or you and your husband aren't seeing a line, or your husband's out of town, or whatever, like, your body is responding the same way with the same fluctuations in hormones.
absolutely. So I always mention that because I feel like we think, well, I only did one workout this week. I don't understand why my body's hormones are off. So, it can be other forms of stress. And then we think, wait, exercise is supposed to be good for us. So how is that actually harming us? So, exercise is great, but, too much or maybe not recovering well can definitely impact performance. So, you asked about signs or how to know when your body is not recovered. So, let's start there. Like, there's some signs that are very clear that I usually ask someone if they do they feel rested. Sometimes people can say like, no, I feel tired all the time. I don't feel like I'm recovering from the workouts. Another big sign is that there's no appetite. If you don't have an appetite, it means those stress hormones might still be circulating and it's suppressing your appetite. So that's another big one. Constant injuries, like just whether it's soft tissue or bone injuries. Bone injuries are a little bit more longer term from longer term sessions of stress without recovering. Could be low iron, like if you're looking at your labs, it could be low iron, low vitamin D, low B12. It might mean that you're just not getting enough food. So low energy, low mood, like your mood is not what maybe you think it should be at that time. And you can kind of look back over the week or the past few days and say, well, my mood has not been amazing. What's going on here? And it could be that you're just not recovering properly. So, those are just some really overt signs that I see. There's plenty of other ones, and everyone kind of experiences it differently. One other one, actually, a couple others that I'm going to mention because I think are really important. Your cycle goes off,
Mm-hmm.
like your menstrual cycle. So it doesn't mean that you just you start missing your period. And I think we've kind of been told that like, okay, amenorrhea now is bad. Like, you have to be getting your cycle every month. Well, that's partially true. There are warning signs that if your period starts to become irregular, like a normal cycle is 21 to 40 days. And you usually get like your period might last like 3 to 5 days or something like that. So if you notice your period is becoming lighter or you're getting it more often or less often, I always say that's like the check engine light on the car is going off. It's not like something's overtly wrong, but it's something we need to start paying attention to and start asking ourselves some questions and say, am I recovering properly? Did I increase my fitness load? Are my workouts more intense? Maybe I need to look a little further or practice a little bit more relaxation or recovery a little bit better just so we can get that period restored. So that's a really great warning sign. And that's especially important if you're trying to become pregnant or if you are, trying to become pregnant as you are running. There's plenty of women that I've worked with that have expressed interest in trying to conceive while training for a marathon or a half marathon. And I think it's possible. It's just paying attention to all those signs and being really in touch with those.
Yeah, I know for me personally, when I was younger, like I didn't get my period for years and I never really paid attention to it. It was not on my radar, which now in retrospect, I would be definitely pointing a finger at myself. And then when my husband and I wanted to start having a family, it was very difficult to find someone who was knowledgeable on the subject. And doctors were like, well, you just need to stop running. You need to stop exercising. I wasn't underweight, but you need to probably gain 5 to 10 pounds. And then, they pumped me full of hormones and none of that helped. And then finally I just changed my diet. And I was eating more like real foods, I started eating meat and was getting more iron and protein. And because, at that time I was like, in my late 20s. And I think I lived a life of Cliff Bars and like peanut butter. So it wasn't a very balanced, nutritious diet. It was, I was like a newscaster. I was always in the news car. I'm like, whatever I can grab to eat, so.
Well, I think, that's a really good point. It's like, if you don't have one of the things I go over is I first assess what someone's eating and kind of get a sense. Is their diet regular? Is their schedule irregular? Are they traveling for work? Like what's going on? Are they a student? And schedules are always different. So I think the most important thing is to first check in with what they're doing now and let them know, like, you might need to eat differently than you are right now in order to restore your hormones. And like, does that sound okay? And you might actually have to change your weight if there is an issue. Like, let's just check in with that first to see how the person feels about that and go over that. Like some people are very adamant about not gaining weight, and that's really scary to a lot of people. So we kind of start there. It's okay to be scared about that. It's what's most important is getting these hormones restored, and it doesn't always have to end up with changing their body shape. But I think, the other thing is like assessing their energy expenditure and like looking closely at what are the activities of the day. I had one client who was a student athlete and she wasn't getting her period. She wasn't trying to have a baby, but she just wasn't getting her cycle. And she said, well, I stopped my workouts. And then when we assessed her daily activity, like we're in New York City, people walk. I said, how many steps are you doing a day? And she was doing like 20,000 steps a day, which is like, that's a lot of miles.
Yeah.
And sure, her doctor didn't ask her. He just said, don't exercise. And in her mind, that's not exercise.
Right.
But her expenditure is much higher. And we have to account for all those extra steps. And I said, are you carrying a backpack? Because I know when I go to work, my backpack is super heavy. And she's like, yeah, I got all my books in it. I got all this stuff in it. I'm like, that's like a rucksack. That's like, we need to definitely count. So matching the energy expenditure with, the food, and, a registered dietitian can be helpful with that, like really diving in closely to see how many calories kind of need to be accounted for. So that's probably the first thing.
Yeah. I want to go dive a little bit deeper into like what a healthy diet should look like broadly. But before, I think it's important to note that like having your cycle is important, even if you're not trying to have a baby, because like, it can lead, if you're training, you will have bone density issues. You are more likely to get injured. There's like a whole host of problems that, having low estrogen can cause big time health problems down the line. Like all that needs to be regulated for your like overall like female health.
Absolutely. I think some of the other things we overlook with that low estrogen is it also, it's kind of like putting you in menopause,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what menopause is low estrogen depletion, and like not making enough, or, not having enough in your body. So what does that look like? There's probably more body fat that's being produced. Metabolism slows down. Cholesterol is increased, cholesterol synthesis. So a lot of times people with prolonged amenorrhea can have high cholesterol levels, but it's not that they're eating saturated fat and meat. It's coming from another way, and it's from the low estrogen. Not to mention, just bone reforming, all the other things, and prevention of injuries. So with men, it might be worth noting now is, testosterone suppression, like being low in testosterone. There are some initial studies. Adam Tenford out of Boston has some great studies that show that a low testosterone can have similar impact on men, meaning like the bone reformation after a workout can be altered with low testosterone. Also, muscle growth. I mean, testosterone is your natural hormone. That's your natural steroid. Like, we don't want that low, and it's suppressed if there's not enough calories and too much exercise, and it's not matched. So, testosterone is not, and you can't take anything to raise testosterone or estrogen. There's no such thing as a pill to raise those levels. It's got to be your body and giving your body what it needs. And maybe this is a good segue to diet.
Yeah, that's a beautiful segue to diet. So yeah, because as a runner, I mean, the time, what you eat, your fuel, and then the timing of it is so important. Like I know personally when I just started running more competitively and I was feeling not recovered for the next workout, my coach was like, okay, what happens once you walk in the door? And I was like, oh, I go straight to kids stuff, whatever. He's like, you need to make sure you are getting, drink a chocolate milk, eat a banana, just have something that you can grab really quickly, because getting that nutrition in within like 30, 60 minutes of your workout is like crucial for recovery. And I felt so much better after I started doing that.
I totally agree. I mean, I think there's definitely there's such great evidence showing that glycogen window makes a huge difference. Like the studies will give someone a placebo or just like water right after the workout, and then they'll give another group a glucose containing beverage, and then they'll assess their energy and their glycogen. They'll literally take muscle samples and see who made more glycogen. And then they could say directly, like, okay, if you take a glycogen or a glucose containing beverage right after your workout, you resynthesize your glycogen, and it's a good thing, and you recover faster. So I would say, I agree with what your coach said. The one caveat to that is that appetite suppression is still going on. And most people are either in a hurry, like you are, because you have kids or other commitments that you have to get to, or you're just not hungry. So you're like, well, my body's telling me it doesn't need food. So I would usually say, like, okay, this is the one time that we really need you to override your body's cues. And intuitively, we know that you need food right after. It doesn't have to be a meal, but we need your body to shift, because when those stress hormones are high, like we said, the appetite hormones are low. So we need to shift that. So we want those stress hormones to go down. And the way to do that is to eat a carbohydrate food along with some protein. And then you create something, another hormone is released called insulin. And insulin is an anabolic hormone, which tells your body to start storing and repairing. So it starts the teeter-totter starts going in the other direction. And so you just have something light right after. If you have zero appetite, do a smoothie. I like the chocolate milk. Have it out on your counter to remind you and to cue you if you need. And then you go on with your day for the next couple of hours until you feel hungry, because it will come on and it will be pretty intense. But, let your body start recovering while you're doing other things.
So even if it's just a tiny, like 100, 200 calories, that's enough to press the button to signal to your body, like, okay, now we're shifting into recovery mode. We need to start producing these hormones, or it needs to be more than that.
Yeah, I would do a little more, maybe like 200 to 400 if you can get that. So a banana and a chocolate milk could be closer to like 200 to 400 for sure. Toast with peanut butter and a banana is great. That's easy. A bar, even doing like a Cliff Bar, those are 280 or so. So that works, because not everyone has access to all these different foods. I go to the track with my team sometimes, or like their longer workouts, and I'll bring tart cherry juice, which is great, because that's also like, that could be an easy 80 calories or 100 calories, and then they have other food with them sometimes, and they can also supplement with
I'm gonna
that.
make that my New
But
Year's resolution to start drinking that, because we had Megan Robinson, who's, I don't know if you know her, she's a registered dietitian as well, on, and she mentioned tart cherry juice too and how like fantastic it is. So I need to start drinking
yeah,
that.
that's your New Year's resolution. So like buy like 3 bottles, keep it out. The key with that is have it out and visible in your refrigerator. So when you open the door, that's what you see.
It's all, the body is so complex and so amazing and so fascinating. Like, it's just, it's, you wouldn't think that, okay, eating carbs is gonna somehow, signal to my body that it needs to be producing these other hormones that will help, rebuild my tissues and recover from the stress and damage that, I just put on my body. It's fascinating.
Well, I think also with that, it's like not eating is stress. Like, add that to our list of stressful things. Like, if you exercise the body and then you don't eat afterwards, that's stress. Your body's got to find energy. And it's not like you just fall over onto the ground. If it's like your tank is empty, like in a car, it just won't run. You don't just fall over out, not having energy. Your body is very smart and it will find energy and it will break down that muscle that you just created because your brain and your heart can only survive on glucose. And the only place that we store glucose is really in our muscles. So you can't really, there's no way around it.
That reminds me too. Another sign of potential hormone imbalance is also poor performance. Like if you're out there and you're not hitting your workouts, which is something that happened to me. And my coach, again, was the one that was like, hey, something's up. You need to go get your labs drawn. And a lot of this is it sounds very similar to overtraining syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, it's like overtraining syndrome, REDS, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome. These are kind of temporary issues that can be easily remedied and reversed by increasing the fueling, getting in the calories throughout the day. It can easily be reversed, but it definitely affects performance because you're never like, our bodies, like we were saying, are so adaptable and they're so smart that the purpose of training, like a training block, is you train your body to use and store energy. But if you're never eating it, you're losing out on those opportunities. You're doing the fitness part, but you're not letting your body really accept those adaptations the way it's supposed to with the fuel. I mean, it's training your body to use fuel more efficiently is what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But if you're never eating it, you're never having that opportunity.
I like the way you put that. So eating after is important. Let's talk about timing first, and then we'll talk about like what the actual food may look like, the macronutrients. But so after the workout, and then when else is important? I know particularly for females, like getting a little something in the tank before you go out is important, right?
Absolutely. For performance, like, our bodies have an hour and a half of energy in us, approximately, depending on the intensity and depending on everything else that was going on the day before. You have about an hour and a half. So if you're going out for longer, or if you're doing a track workout, that the duration, like the clock starts ticking once you leave the house. Like you have an hour and a half. Your body is using energy to even do your warm up, to chat with your friends before, to do your stretches. Like the clock is still ticking. So you don't want to use up all that energy and then not have anything left for your last rep. And that's where you feel that performance impact is the last rep. You might feel sluggish for the whole duration, but you're really not going to have enough to finish properly, or the cool down is a slog.
And
which can be like that.
Oh yeah, there's nothing worse than like that 2 to 3 mile cool down where you're just like, oh my gosh, can I just be done already? You want to avoid that feeling. Take my word for it if you haven't experienced that. So I'm going to guess there's a lot of people listening to this that are intermittent fasters and they do not eat before they exercise. And I have had many conversations with athletes about why that is not wise for runners. It may work for other people. I think you and I have talked about this in the past about how it is beneficial for some people, but if you are a runner, especially like when it comes to having balanced hormones as a female, like eating just a couple hundred calories before you go out is really important. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So, the body is going to use energy, like we said, and taking in food is also training your gut to absorb those calories. And like I was saying, I attended this really great lecture by Asker Jakendrup, who does a lot of work on cyclists and endurance athletes. And it was fantastic. And he talks about like on the very like basic level, like where they were measuring the GLUT receptors in the gut, and like basically they found that the more food you ate before and during a workout, the better your body becomes at using it for energy, and then you can sustain faster speeds. So if you can't just show up to a marathon and say, I'm going to go do, a goo every 30 minutes. Like you have to train your body. And the part of that training is really changing your receptors and changing it on a cellular level. So your body gets used to taking that in much, much faster. So, that's one major reason. And also it's like getting used to trying different foods, like see what works for you. So, on race day, what your body feels good with and what maybe it doesn't. So it's a good opportunity to practice your fueling plan for when you do get to your race.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any like common thread with any pre-race advice is to don't wait until race day to try something. You always want to practice like every aspect in your training. Okay, so say somebody's listening to this and they're like, I think, I could potentially have a hormone imbalance. What would their next steps be? And like, what would you say the path forward may look like? Like, I know we've talked about ensuring that like the training volume and intensity is at the right level. You may need to scale back. You need to make sure you have enough recovery. You need to eat before, eat after, maintain like good nutrition throughout the day, which actually, before we get to the path forward, so what does that good nutrition look like? Like, how do you know how much you should be eating? I don't want to encourage people to be like, you need to count your calories and count your macros. Like,
Right.
we don't have time for that.
I agree. Yeah, no, exactly. Like focus on the running, not on the counting the macros.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, once you kind of have a sense of how many calories your body needs, like I think like talking with a professional is helpful, or, just starting out with like eating every 3 to 4 hours. I think that's another great way to gauge. So eating a breakfast, that's a proper breakfast that has a combination of nutrients like carbohydrates and proteins, and then a recovery food, and then a refueling lunch. And I'm assuming you're working out in the morning. Like I call it a refueling lunch because you're trying to refill all of that energy that you used at your workout earlier. So, you're not going to do as great if you have like a burger and fries. Like your body needs carbohydrates, it needs vegetables, and it needs protein. So every 3 to 4 hours, and then a snack in the afternoon and a dinner, like a balanced dinner, not grazing, not a bowl of cereal, a proper dinner that has a variety of nutrients. And I usually kind of say like, on a workout day or a greater intensity day, half of the plate is the starch. So using like an 8 or 9-inch plate, half of it around that, everyone is different. Obviously, everyone needs a slightly different amount of food, but half of it needs to be a starch. So I think people have kind of gotten a little confused because they're like, well, I'm eating salads. Look at all these great salads with chicken. I'm like, but you still need starch, and carbs are not bad. They actually provide energy and help us to feel better. And that's a part of a healthy diet. So half of the plate, and carbs could be any form. It could be brown rice, white rice, potatoes, like baked potatoes. We're not talking about mashed potatoes with like lots of stuff added, but like a baked potato is inexpensive and pretty easy to make, along with like other nutrients at the meal, can be really nourishing for a runner. Pasta, but not just a gigantic bowl of pasta. It's like, well, there's got to be some kind of protein with it. Maybe it's some chicken, or maybe it's like veggie burger patties along with that, and then a side salad. So that's a balanced meal. And then snacks at night are totally fine, like 1 or 2 snacks, but not a bag of chips. Like chips go along with a healthy meal, and they're totally fine. So eating often is where I would say to begin, and eating carbs with your meals is probably the first place to start.
This conversation is making me hungry.
I know, me too. It's like
it is lunchtime. Like, yeah, it's funny. When I was carbo loading last week for CIM, I realized I'm like, I already eat mostly carbs all the time anyways. Like the carb loading was not hard at all because I don't know, I just think like as runners, like we just become very adept to eating the carbs because we know how important it is. Okay, so now let's talk about, thank you for that. That was very, I'm salivating and I'm like thinking about what's for lunch, but it was also very informative.
Well, there's one, and here's the soundbite. Like, here's what I would usually say. If someone's like, just tell me the healthy diet to eat, I usually say, here's my take: choose fresh vegetables and fruits, lean proteins, complex carbs, low fat dairy, and monounsaturated fats. Like, that's
There
it.
you go.
That's a healthy, that's it in a nutshell.
I'm going to start emailing you every day and be like, what are you making for dinner?
Totally. Sometimes I make really great things, sometimes not so good. So
yeah, that's how I
it's just
am.
like,
Although my sometimes really great things is like maybe a couple times a month. It's challenging. Anyways, okay. So what does the path forward look like? If somebody thinks that they might be low, the first step would probably be to go like get their labs drawn and make sure hormones and iron and B12 and vitamin D are all in that panel.
yeah, no, I think that's really good. And I think we're much more involved in our medical care these days. Like, we're much more advocates for ourselves than maybe years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's Dr. Google where we're looking up things more readily. I think starting with a physician, like someone who's gone to medical school, they've taken classes on hormones and hormone imbalances, they know what to draw. So it could be an internist, a primary care doctor, a family care doctor. It could also be your GYN or an endocrinologist. Like, those are probably the best physicians to start with. And they'll pull labs. And sometimes I'll ask the doctor, like, if they've worked with clients before that are athletes. People that are athletes are a little different. I think most people that go to doctors are sick, and athletes are not. They're actually really healthy. So I think it's really hard to kind of sift through all of the information to figure out what's really going on. So sometimes I ask if they have experience with working with athletes, but those are the doctors that I would probably recommend working with. And labs, there's tons of different labs that can be really helpful. But again, I didn't go to medical school and I'm not a doctor, but I do have a list of labs that are important for a physician to draw. They would have to interpret it though, because I don't know how to do that. I know how to do certain, there's a few labs that are like red flags,
like ferritin and iron and
right. And like an estrogen level, an estradiol is a good indicator that something's going on if your estradiol is low. But again, like I was talking about before, hormones are always fluctuating. So it depends on when you get these labs.
Oh yeah, you need to, if you're a female, like you need to know when your cycle was. They should be asking you that. If they don't ask you that when they're giving you the results, then that's a red flag.
It's hard to interpret.
Yeah.
Yeah, and cortisol levels are really not, they can be helpful. But again, if you just worked out or if you're feeling stressed at that moment, that cortisol is going to be high. Same as insulin. Like, insulin levels are high, like after a meal, like that's normal. So it's a lot of, these labs they fluctuate so much. So it's harder to use that for diagnostic criteria. Other ones that are really helpful are like LH, which is luteinizing hormone, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, prolactin, TSH, and the sex hormone binding globulin. Those are probably some of the more common ones that would be drawn and, again, interpreted by a physician. So those are helpful. I could give those, I could send you a list and you can post that if anyone has any additional, questions about it. But that's where I would go first and see what the physician says. And after getting those results and find out what's going on. Sometimes there could be other medical causes of like either a loss of period or hormone imbalance. Like, there's something called PCOS, which is pretty common, which can affect the cycle. Could have to do with maybe coming off of a medication, like maybe you're on a birth control type pill or something. Might take a little longer for the body to adjust. So there's other reasons why, and other medications can affect hormones. So it's important for, someone to evaluate that. Also, hypothyroidism, fairly common and harmless. That can be something that's going on as well.
Yeah, a lot of those were ones that I had issues with, and running was not the trigger. It was actually just having babies. And like, it's pretty common, I think, after you have babies for your hormones to be out of whack. And it was my running, my performance was really tanking. And my coach was like, you need to get your labs drawn. And that was like, thank goodness for running, because I mean, I felt terrible. My mood was terrible. I was angry all the time. And thankfully for me, I spoke with a doctor who knew athletes, and so they knew what was kind of normal to be like in a different range, and then what to focus on, and then what to do with the hormones. And like, I was lucky enough that I didn't have to go on any medications. I just needed to take some supplements, and then over like the course of a few months, things regulated, and we keep an eye on it. And I get tested I get blood drawn every 6 months to keep an eye on everything. But yeah, and I know a lot of people who have had similar stories where they may have to change their diet or change like their exercise regimen. But for me, like and other people I know, we just needed to take some supplements, and that was able to like get everything back in line. Yeah.
Good. And do you feel better like after?
Oh yeah.
You feel back to yourself. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I actually have written about this quite a bit, because after I had my second child, like I didn't feel like myself, and I had, dark thoughts, and I was in a bad mood and angry all the time. And I thought at first I was like, well, it's just because I'm exhausted, because neither one of my kids are sleeping. But I was very relieved to know it was because my estrogen was sky high, and then everything else was out of whack. And so it was after I just take one supplement for that, and it's crazy. Like I became myself again. I was like so relieved that I wasn't so angry and wanted to punch somebody in the face every day. So hormones are a very powerful thing.
They are. They control a lot.
They do. And my poor husband.
How long did it take you to feel better?
Just a couple months.
That's great.
Yeah. I would say things were pretty where they should be in 6 months, but the estrogen had come down a considerable amount within like 2 to 3 months.
I think that's great. I'm glad you were able to recognize that and didn't go on for a long time without knowing what was going on. I think that's also a very frustrating thing that we hear about a lot, is just kind of no one knows what the answers are, and it kind of can take a little longer to figure it out.
Yeah, I encourage people to ask around, like your point about getting a doctor who's familiar with athletes or familiar with women. Like, I think it's really important to ask your running buddies who they see, because you can be led astray pretty easily, I think, especially, in like Western medicine.
Well, and I was telling you earlier before we started, I think my story was a little different than yours, but it's somewhat similar to what we're talking about. Before I had my kids, I was using hormones like birth control, and I went off of it and then just never got a period. And at the time, the doctor, was very well intended, said, well, if it doesn't come, we could start using Clomid if you're trying to conceive, and that'll help you, which is a medication that kind of induces ovulation, I believe. So, but it's still a hormone. And I said, well, my body, there's nothing wrong with me medically, like what's going on? And he said, well, I don't think you're under fueling, and I wasn't underweight. So he said, well, it's probably not related to your weight. But at the time, like looking back, he didn't know that I was exercising a lot all those days. And it was probably suppressing or delaying my hormones from coming back. So eventually I was able to kind of restore my cycle on my own. I remember I was on vacation a lot that summer. So it was probably because of that too. Like looking back, I was trying to stay calm.
That was a very successful vacation. That's great.
It totally worked. So highly recommend that. But anyway, yeah. And so I never had an issue. And yeah, since then it's never been abnormal again. So, but knowing like, looking back at that, like I bet there's people that, women that go to their doctors and they, the doctor might not really know or do like an extensive workup in their eating and their exercise history to know that maybe there's a little bit of a mismatch, and that can just be, remedied by some lifestyle adjustments versus like medication so quickly.
Yes.
But, everyone's different. Some people prefer like, I want it now. Like, let's just do it. Like,
yes, that's true.
Medication.
And it is, yeah.
And that's fine.
And
whatever works.
Body is different. But yeah, I think that's also a great point, is if you are a runner, you need to make sure whoever you're seeing, whatever healthcare professional, knows that, because it does have a big impact on your body and just the way that it works and the demands that are upon it. So that's also a great point. This has been very eye-opening, and I really appreciate you like sharing your own story as well as all this helpful information. Amy, this has been so informative, and I really appreciate you sharing your personal story as well. All right, thanks, Amy. Bye.
Bye.